Hello friends, this is part 2 of webinar 17 on China and Asia. Okay, well, in this part I want to discuss the current situation in China, the economy of China, international relations, expansion of China. I will answer a lot of questions asked by you. This part also contains a lot of quantum calibrations. I'm very excited about this part because some of the calibrations are amazing actually, and mind-boggling, and it's like shocking even. Some of these calibrations I've already done to alleviate sort of the load for myself to calibrate it live, and some I'm doing live for you as we speak, and you see literally how I'm doing these calibrations right there on screen, so you understand how my process works. Okay, so quantum calibrations, I'm sure all of you or most of you know what those are. Please go to LADA.com under LADA's work, and then you can click on quantum calibrations under LADA's work, where you can learn a little bit for free. And there are also videos linked there. I talk about different things. I wrote various articles previously about quantum calibration. So the majority of you, unless you're new to my work, you probably know how that works. You probably read my book, Quantum Calibrations. It's right behind me on that side. As I said, it's very hard to see which side because it's reversed on the screen, and I'm looking at the screen right now. So sorry about that. Okay, so what I wanted to say is that I will begin with a quantum calibration. Teresa asked this question: what is the quantum calibration of the 100-year plan that I talked about so much in segment 1, and I will continue talking about that plan. What is the actual quantum calibration and the chi level of this plan? And so the plan was consummated by Mao, and then perfected and got brought to the new level by Xi Jinping. I'm sorry, by Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping. So you listened to all that in part 1. If necessary, go and re-listen, because I embedded a lot of information throughout the things that I'm discussing there. And now I want to calibrate it. And let's see. So as it evolved and as it is right now, because the dates are important, these dates are telling us so that the quantum calibrations of the 100-year plan as it stands, as it developed and stands today, are quantum calibration, QC is 285. That's not bad. Okay, it's positive. It's neutrality and friendliness. In other words, Chinese basically are saying, we want to trade with you, world, open up to us, right? It's not like wow, but it's pretty good. And chi level of the 100-year plan, 290. In other words, there is openness and desire to be sort of like on a good foot and to trade with the world, to provide things. Hey, we don't want to be your bosom friends, we don't want to be like buddy, but we want to trade with you. We want to have that open and positive relationship with you. That's pretty much what these calibrations are saying. So guys, please write down my calibrations and please share them in comments on Patreon, because this way more people can see them, right? Okay, so that's good calibrations, positive. That's generally pretty positive. Now, what I also want to do, oh yes, if you read my book, and that will be over there, right on top there, you see the quantum calibrations book, and in that book I calibrated China. I calibrated about 100 other countries around the world, lots of countries in Asia. I calibrated Chinese potential. I calibrated its superpower status, which right now is number 3 superpower in the world, okay, but it's growing. Please review in the book all these calibrations. They have not changed much since I calibrated. I answered the question some of you posed to me, have the calibrations changed? And no, they have not changed much, because when I calibrate, I take into account a period, usually period into the future, like from the point at which I calibrate into the future, unless I specify something else. This is how I do it. And so we are within that period. That book will continue being a pretty serious reference for you. You will be able to discern a lot of things from that book going forward, and it will give you a lot of guidance. It will continue doing that for years to come. Even if calibration changed, my prognosis, my predictions, my overview of things, and the direction in which things are going will remain the same, because that's how I do things. I do them with the view of the future, with the perspective into the future. Okay, so even when I say current calibrations, that usually gives you a minimum of 2-3 years forward, oftentimes 5 and 6 and 8 and 10 years forward, sometimes longer. It depends on the situation, unless the timeline changes, which they do sometimes change, but unless the timeline drastically changes, all this stays in place, including calibrations. All right, so I'm calibrating now, second calibration, the current economy of China. How does the current economy of China calibrate? And I will only give you QC here. And that is QC of the current economy of China. 200. So currently the economy of China calibrates at 200. That's actually low for China. That's the consequence of COVID, guys. Interesting, right? Please look at my book, Geopolitical Quantum Calibrations, where I give you calibrations of Chinese economy that I arrived at previously, and that was higher. So that went down. This is why I wanted to give you a new calibration. So the QC is 200 for Chinese economy. Now, let's talk about the current economy and expansion. First, let's touch upon COVID and its consequence for China. You listened to all 4 webinars, I'm pretty sure many of you did. That's Series 3, COVID-19 Catalyst, and 2020-2026 predictions. Please refer back to those webinars where I discuss what effect COVID has had, how it catalyzed, and how it became a harbinger for changes in the economy, in the way of life, and how else it will be developing. I also talk about specifically China there, as well as every other country on the globe, pretty much every region on the globe. So what happens here with China is that China came out of COVID earlier than others. And also what they did, they only in China is possible nowadays, they closed down, they shut down entire cities, entire regions, wherever they felt that the contagion was too large and they needed to isolate those people. So they did a lot of work that way. Once you close down the whole city, stop economy there, what happens, of course, your economy suffers. However, they claim that they have relatively small number of deaths, something like 70 or 80,000. I do not believe that. I think that the number of deaths is somewhere around 200 to 250,000. That's what I see claircognizantly from Akashic Records. That's still a lot lower than the US, and that is also a testament to their Communist Party's ability to mobilize everybody. So that's mobilization type economy, which was characteristic of the early Soviet Union. And then when Soviet Union stopped doing that, and Brezhnev wanted people to live well. Oh, we suffered so much through the war. Let people live well. And that's when I grew up. It was good times until the Soviet Union fell apart. So China still has this ability because of the Communist Party rulership and like grip on the country, grasp on the country. They have the ability to mobilize the population anytime, to close down cities, which is impossible. They completely shut down everything, right? And for the population of 1.5 billion plus, 250,000 deaths, that's my top number actually, maybe a little bit more, but that's pretty much my number. I kept it at 250. I don't know, maybe it's 300, 350. But listen, for that population, it's relatively small, okay, relative to the population. It's all terrible when people die. It's all sad and all that. But I'm just saying, relative to the population per capita, it's a relatively small number. Okay, so Chinese also developed some vaccines. They are not considered good vaccines. So whoever tried them say that the efficiency is something like 50%. So Chinese vaccines are not popular. Russian vaccines, on the other hand, are popular. And I just wanted to insert this here. Guys, Russians registered third vaccine, okay? And now Europeans are pretty much standing in line to buy Sputnik V. The second vaccine, I do not know its name, but the second vaccine registered in Russia, which is already being produced, that's the most popular vaccine in Russia proper because it's considered superior to Sputnik V. Russians prefer that vaccine. This is why actually capacities and the amounts of vaccine are being freed up to distribute abroad. Keep that in mind because European countries are now standing in line to buy Sputnik V and it's much better than those others. And in the US, they're also trying to, like clandestinely buy a Russian vaccine because it's clearly much better than others. Anyway, what we are saying here is that they did not develop very good vaccines, but what they did, because of their mobilization economy, they were able to come out of COVID relatively quickly, faster than others. And of course, COVID started arguably in China. Listen to my webinar number 11 from Series 3 about how I feel this all began. Okay, so we have the situation when Chinese economy started recovering faster than other economies of the world. And if they publish numbers for 2020, say German numbers, US numbers, other European numbers, and you see that economy is something like flat or made 1% or 2%, don't believe that, because economies of the West are pretty much devastated by COVID. That's the truth. And only if they say that it's down by 10 to 20%, then they're close to telling the truth. If they say that the economy has been flat or gained something or minus 1%, that is a lie, okay? That cannot be. Despite the gains in Amazon, with Walmart, with some other companies that sell online, despite the gains in the stock market, the money just flocks there. But this is all fake economy. That is also fake economy. GDP is counted in fake ways. If you count GDP correctly as manufacturing, as production, as infrastructure building, road building, population gaining, like how it's counted in Russia, in that conservative, correct way of counting the economy, then Western countries are all in terrible shambles. Economies, terrible shambles. They say that the Chinese economy is going to be like small percentage up, like 2 to 5%. However, the calibration at 200 does not suggest that they are up, maybe 1-2%. So Chinese are also cooking the books. However, it is still the strongest economy of the world. So the US, they say that in dollar equivalent, GDP of the US is still ahead of Chinese GDP, but this is fake numbers, fake economy. For example, they count like Tesla stock or Amazon stock gaining substantially. They count it as part of GDP. They count government spending as part of GDP. All right, I can maybe agree with that. But this is supposed to be a capitalist economy. Therefore, government spending should be almost zero or very, very low. And that is gaining more and more GDP percentage points. Borrowing is counted as part of GDP. This is ridiculous, guys. In other words, you borrowed a few $1 billion or a few $100 billion more like, and that's part of your GDP. How's that part of your GDP, right? Meantime, manufacturing is practically dead. Sales are practically dead. There are lots of small companies, stores that are going out of business, guys. And all that does not influence GDP, supposedly. So don't believe that. And in China, they're cooking the books as well. However, it's still a lot more honest, simply because China produces so much. China makes so much. And their GDP, for the most part, is still real. So no matter how they cook the books, their GDP will still come out as real, as a lot more honest. Their numbers will come out as much more honest than anywhere in the West. Ukraine is doing the same thing as the US. They took the cue from the US and started counting whatever they borrow from IMF that they cannot even repay as part of their GDP. So yay! IMF was giving us another loan of $1 billion. And that is added to the GDP. The economy is dying, but they're borrowing very well. So their GDP is good. Well, Russian counting of the GDP is one of the most honest, maybe the most honest in the world today. And this is why we go by, if Russia is saying this is where our GDP is, I go by that, you know? That's the most honest. And then if in relation to that, say US says, oh, and our GDP is doing better than Russian, it's like, you know, maybe the numbers are larger in the US, but the population is larger here too, right? So enough with this rambling. I was just trying to give you a full picture here. But what is important to understand is that GDP is skewed. PPP, which is calculated based on the actual value, how much you can buy for your yuan or for your dollar, how much can you buy in your country. And based on that, if you calculate it like that, that's a lot more honest. And China has been ahead of the US for the longest time. And now, if you calculate even GDP based on US dollar value, even there, China is like very close to the US. And if US counted its GDP honestly based on manufacturing, production, sales, based on economic indicators, not based on the stock market or borrowing, if the US counted it honestly, then China would have been far ahead of the US already. Okay, in other words, the Chinese economy, the size of real Chinese economy, is a lot larger than the US, guys. You know, and keep that in mind. Whatever you hear out there, these are all fake numbers. US is number one in economy. Fake numbers. Do not trust that at all. Well, one of the engines of growth, and China continues being an engine of growth, so one of the engines of growth of China is the AliExpress. What is AliExpress? This is a counterpart to Amazon, founded by Jack Ma. And I talked about him and AliExpress in the Geopolitical Quantum Calibrations book, guys, so you can go back and refer to that. AliExpress is growing very fast, doing very well. I order through AliExpress, actually, things that I cannot find on Amazon or somewhere else. And I've been shopping on Amazon and online. I don't go to stores practically at all anymore because I hated malls. I would get nauseated from the energy of the malls. So I started doing that a very, very long time ago. So I've been a patron of Amazon for the longest time. Now I also buy on AliExpress whenever I see things there that cannot be found anywhere else, and that's plenty, actually. It's a real shame that small mom and pop stores are going out of business, because those are a lot more charming, of course, and small cafes, coffee houses, stores, etc., where you buy produce, there are local little markets. It's a real shame that they're going out of business, but giants are taking over. So AliExpress, incidentally, the headquarters of AliExpress, even though it's considered a Chinese company, but the headquarters are located in Singapore, guys. So you know, so AliExpress is a big engine for the distribution of all the production that China makes inside the country. It's all produced inside the country. So while headquarters are in Singapore, because that's a major port, number one. Number two, the laws are a lot more capitalist, and it's like its accounting, its taxes, everything is sort of outside of the scope of China, outside of the supervision of the Chinese Communist Party, but at the same time it works almost exclusively with Chinese merchants. They do have other merchants as well, but Chinese merchants cover humongous territory as far as what they produce, or how cheap compared to others they can make it also still. Even though salaries in China are middle class and upper classes are growing by leaps and bounds, guys. This is not the same China I discussed with you in segment 1. It's not the poor China. China is quite well-to-do. In its own way, there is a difference between well-to-do in China and well-to-do in Sweden or the US or France or Italy. There is a difference. There are cultural difference. There are also differences what they pay more attention to. But the classes, there are middle and upper classes growing by leaps and bounds. And this will only accelerate in period 9, because that's the period of the South. And China is really the northeast of the world, just like Russia, but at the same time, it's still sort of lumped with the global South, okay, in some ways. So there are still a lot of poor people in China, and they struggle to get into the middle class, and the middle class struggles to get wealthier. And this greed, that's a very characteristic of China today, unfortunately. So they grab, they produce. Then environment really suffers in so many ways. But Chinese are almost obsessed, not almost, they truly are obsessed with getting rich. This has become such an overriding thing for Chinese, and this is what everybody has to deal with right now. So it damages the environment. They kill animals. There's a lot of stuff that is happening that way. But there are 1.5 billion people living there. India is next in line, by the way. Also, bad situations with environment, with mistreatment of nature and animals going on in India. Lots of pollution, terrible stuff. So these two countries, the giant countries, they will need to be watched like hawks on so many levels. A lot of you post interesting questions that allude more to the economy and human rights in China and how China behaves towards other countries. But guys, I also want to emphasize the damage to the environment and to animals coming from China. Okay, it's not the topic of this discussion. I talked about these things previously in series 3. Incidentally, I discussed the Chinese attitude. It's improving. It is improving to the point that more and more people are getting cognizant, and all this is happening because of pressure from abroad, pressure from Russia and from the West, from everywhere from the West, pressure to observe human rights, to observe the rights of animals, and to observe at least somehow the nature, how you're damaging the nature. So with growth, unfortunately, Chinese growth, come all these things. Very, very negative. But China is on a binge to expand, okay, at all cost. They started looking more into this, okay? It's not at all cost anymore, but it's still very worrying for many of us on so many levels. And guys, I like Chinese culture. I love Chinese culture, as a matter of fact. I'm a feng shui master. I'm an honorary Chinese. And of course, I have relationships, close relationships that are Chinese from Hong Kong primarily, but they're originally from China. And so I know a lot of things. I know a lot of stories. And I'm telling you, if I'm telling you this is the truth, because I kind of know this stuff. Anyway, so that's as far as environment goes. And so expansion comes at a huge cost. But it's not going to stop anytime soon. Now, what AliExpress does, basically that's part of the Silk Road movement, the one road, one way, something like that. I don't translate it as way, but this way I translate it as new Silk Roads. And there are multiple Silk Roads. What is Silk Roads? Basically, China uses this catch name, Silk Roads, to establish trade routes with important parts of the world where China wants to ship what they produce. And they produce a lot. So there are factories, manufacturing facilities, whatnot, that produce such a wide scope of things that are traditionally Chinese or are traditional to other cultures. For example, I was shopping for LADA star pendants. I will tell you that somewhere else. I will probably show you pictures and explain what that means. That's a Rus Vedic symbol, ancient Rus symbol that is very important. And you know, I'm LADA, so for me, this is doubly important. By the way, behind me, you can see some images of LADA, goddess LADA. So I started displaying images of LADA. I was looking for this LADA star pendant, both in Russia and in China. I ordered in Russia and it was made to order, so it's individual order, and it's 3 months, guys, and it still has not arrived. And the fault is not Russian. The fault is of the U.S. Postal Service. They are footballing my poor pendant all over the U.S. That's how bad U.S. Postal Service is. Because it left Russia on December 7th or 9th, and it still has not arrived. Can you believe it? And it was the order was placed on November 28th. So it's not even the fault of a poor merchant in Russia who did that, a poor artisan who created that pendant for me. But I ordered, like, mass-produced LADA star pendants from China, and they're cheap, they're mass-produced, they're not precious metal like that Russian pendant, and they arrived within 2-3 weeks. That's how well-trained, well logistically designed these trade routes are. I ordered other things from China, and pretty much everything arrived anywhere between 2 and 4, maybe 5 weeks. There's only one order that still has not arrived, and they're telling me, don't worry, it's on the way, it's because of COVID, it's delayed. But it's highly unusual because everything else arrived, and I ordered like 10 or 12 different things from China, maybe more, actually. I will show you somewhere on Patreon. I will share with you guys what I ordered, what this is about, etc. That's going to be a different story. This webinar is about China. So what does this tell us? You know, maybe I would love to order from Russia. I think U.S. Postal Service is under some kind of like creepy orders from both Trump and Biden to slow down everything from Russia and to sabotage. I swear to God, because you cannot explain it any other way. They kept my poor LADA star pendants that I ordered from them for a while in Queens. Then they footballed them to New Jersey, then they footballed them to Iowa, guys. Iowa. Look at the map of the US, where upstate New York is, where I live, and where Iowa is. Can you believe it? In other words, they make those kinds of mistakes, or they do it on purpose because it comes from Russia. It's unbelievable. Couldn't invent it if you tried. I don't know. I will get it eventually, I know. And Chinese have this worked out scheme, and they send everything around the world and everywhere, not just the US. I'm in the US, so that's a hard country to send to from China. It's a tough country, but they send it everywhere. People write all kinds of great reviews on AliExpress saying, my item arrived within 2-3 weeks ahead of schedule. I'm so happy, blah, blah, blah. And they write that from Russia, from Brazil, from everywhere, from Europe. As I said, there are more obstacles to deliver it to the US, and it still delivers pretty well. What does this tell us? these routes have been developed all over the world. This is what this new Silk Road means. Okay, these trade routes that are so logistically well designed that they deliver all over the world without a hitch. As I said, I only had one order bomb and still has not arrived after about 1.5 months. Okay, so that's only one order out of about 12 or 13 orders I placed with them. Where do the Silk Roads go? That's through Russia, about 2 Silk Roads live from Russia, and that goes to Europe. That goes to Russia, of course, and to Europe. And Europe is the most lucrative market right now for China. Again, what China is doing, because of the animosity that was displayed by the US, they're shifting a lot of trade out of the US. So that actually could cause us in the future some problems, such as everything will become more expensive in the US, because we were really lavishing, we were like luxuriating, because a lot of things from China were so cheap and so easy to obtain. The more Chinese shift out of the US, because US has been so hostile to them, the more they will ship to other parts of the world. Even if they don't make as much profit, they will be able to sell more with less obstacles, and that's very important. But Europe is the most expensive market. In other words, you sell the most expensively in Europe, and so they're shifting a lot of trade to Europe. Of course, I will return to Europe in a moment, because that's very important. The new deal between Europe, or EU rather, EU and China, it's a really, really important deal. So another route, or several routes rather, that's around Southeast Asia. Another important route, of course, goes to North America. Yet another one to South America. There's Brazil, Mexico, and other countries in Latin America, in fact. I should say Latin America, not South America, because Mexico is on the Northern American side, but it is together with the rest of South America. In other words, it's Latin America. Okay, guys? So don't hold me to that. And of course, there is a route to Australia and to New Zealand as well. And to Africa too. To Africa, although it's a very small one. It's very underdeveloped, because Africa, relative to the rest of the world, is really poor still. However, they will be doing better in period 9. Read in my book, Geopolitical Quantum Calibrations. Okay. So all these routes. Well, also there's some stuff going to the Middle East as well, but that's relatively minor. They try to develop routes through the sea, through the oceans. Of course, Russian route is the land route, and then when Russian routes through the Arctic go into full effect, that will be yet another sea route that goes through Russia, and that is very safe. And about that we will learn in webinar 18. So what does it do? Little by little, these routes, the ability to undermine the competition all over the world, right? Because everywhere else is produced more expensively. There are countries which can produce as cheap as China, or even cheaper than China, but what is their problem? They don't have trade routes. You know, it's enormous, gigantic logistical thing, logistical problem to design those kinds of trade routes. And you know what? Chinese proved themselves to be very good at that stuff. Really good. You know, we are talking logistics that are, in fact, 4D. They're, even though you deliver, so they bridge a gap between 3D, physical, because they deliver physical goods everywhere, and the 4D, and it's very, very good. You know, and they're doing all this through all the sabotage and all the undermining that the US tried to do to them. They're still doing it. You know, in other words, this has huge future. I know Seeker asked me a very good question, and I'm probably going to pull it up for you right now. Okay, and this question is quite voluminous, and it actually goes very well with what I'm talking about here. So there is a worry that the way Chinese are doing business and the success and influence they're getting, including unfair competition, state-subsidized companies, identifying target products and producing below production price to bankrupt competition. There is a worry about that all over the world. So Chinese might end up with everything, he says, not respecting intellectual property, spying on countries and companies, controlling or hoarding resources, gold or commodities in physical form, via stock ownership in the ground, contracts, etc. Well, first of all, I don't understand what's so terrible with hoarding resources, gold and commodities. They need all this for production, for manufacturing. That's number one. What's so terrible about that? And what the US, the West, did not hoard when they could. Now they're forced to sell everything. But if they could, they would still hoard it. Because the business is part of China Inc., it is a mighty opponent. Okay, China is prepared to sacrifice even human life to achieve a target. I'm not sure what this is about. What human life do they sacrifice? But okay, China is threatening countries economically which are voicing concerns about Tibet, Huawei, 5G, etc. Okay, threatening countries economically, and the West doesn't do that. The US doesn't do that. So there is a worry that Chinese might take over everything through unfair competition. I described in previous segment how that actually works. And a 100-year plan means basically that they want to achieve the top position in the world and improve the lives of their population at all costs. It's very well known. US, UK, Japan, and other countries, especially US, UK, and Japan, behave to them in the same exact way. So they're returning the favor. So is the objective of China to dominate the world, and to which extent will they be successful? Or will the fact that we are moving towards fifth dimension produce a different outcome? Will it be possible for China to make a repeat of the USA's dominance in the last 200 years? Because we will be moving towards a more balanced world, will there be room and resources for everyone on the planet? Is the objective of China to dominate the world? No, it's not. The objective of China is what I said, to be a top economy, to improve the lives of their population, to consolidate their country in such a way and make the lives of their citizens so good because they suffered so much through hundreds of years. This is their objective. Do they want to dominate the whole world and become US number 2? No, they don't. And by the way, the US did not dominate the world for 200 years. The US dominated the world arguably since 1945, or maybe we can say that from some time earlier in the 20th century, since the beginning of the 20th century, but not even the world. They only dominated parts of the world, especially both Americas, since sometime in the end of 19th century. Before that, the US was not in as good of a position, and they had civil war and lots of other things. China will not emulate the US, not at all. And I continue telling you that's part of the great balancer now, China, that is, okay, together with Russia. They're bonded together that way. There are pluses and minuses to that. So continue listening to this webinar because I'll continue answering your question. Now, to briefly answer, will 5D produce a different result? We are nowhere near 5D. We'll be in 4D for the longest time first. 5D is the goal. 5D is the dream. 5D is where I want passionately all of us to be. And pockets of the world will be in 5D. There are pockets in China that are 5D. But the majority of China is between 3D and 4D. And they're actually doing very well in 4D. And listen, guys, you have to understand the mentality of those people and those countries that were slaves to the West for a long time. We're invaded, we're pillaged, we're humiliated, we are robbed, blind killed. They want to be on top now. And the West has done so many bad things that they're justified. In some way, they're justified. I know it looks bad to you. I don't know, Seeker, this whole comment, I do understand and appreciate how your point of view, your vantage point, I do appreciate that. As somebody who lives in Europe and who is worried about his country, European economy, etc., I appreciate that very much. But fear is oozing out of this comment. You probably read this somewhere, because there are fear mongers. In Russia, by the way, even there are fear mongers, but they are being ridiculed right now, who say, China will take us over, we are going to be under China very soon. Russia will disappear, Chinese will invade us. There are such people, even in Russia, who try to create this panic and create a rift between Russia and China. And guess what? In the West, they say the same thing. In Europe, in the US, China. In Asia, in Australia, in New Zealand, there's a lot of fear about Chinese expansion. It's understandable. There are many, many, many Chinese in the world, right? The country has become very powerful. The US literally gave them this power, as I explained to you in previous segment. If you listened carefully, you understood what I was saying. US handed them this power. What were they supposed to say? Oh, no, we're not going to take all this power, all this tech, all this manufacturing capacity you're giving us, because we want to continue staying poor. We want to continue staying under your thumb and destitute. Please continue ruling us. Chinese said, we want to be our own people. We are powerful people. We are talented people. We need to allow the talents and the creativity of our population and the business prowess of our population to flourish. They're allowing all that. Meantime, we're keeping the country together through the rule of the Communist Party. You understand what I'm saying here? You have to understand their point of view. Okay? So from your point of view, it may look like invasion. But are you looking at it in a higher dimensional point of view? Are you looking at it from the perspective that is honest? Or are you looking at it from the perspective that is fear-driven, that is egocentric, that only takes into account the needs and desires of your population, your country's population, and disregards completely other parts of the world? Think about it for a second, okay? So, as far as creating a more balanced world, I will tell you guys the key to all this, to creating a balanced world, for creating the world where everybody's interests are taken into account, but nobody becomes that hegemon like the US has been in the past 20, 30 years, not 200 years, of course. Past 20, 30 years, the US has been the hegemon. Now it's not anymore. It has lost its position as the hegemon. So the only key to not allowing this to happen in the future, and so that everybody's interests are taken into account, is what? Russia, the great balancer. Russia is the only country that can balance out all these interests. There is no other country like that. Okay, China is trying to do trade with the world in a balanced way. It basically wants to do this cooperation through Silk Roads, through trade routes, through AliExpress, through making deals with different countries and alliances and organizations and whatnot. But it is only Russia who can rebalance in such a way that it stays balanced. The problem with that is that the West is sabotaging Russia every step of the way. Okay? US, EU, look at this craze that they're doing right now. I haven't even talked about it. I did not get the chance. Lavrov was forced to say that they are ready to sever relations with the EU. Can you believe it? I mean, that was never said before. Never, ever. During Soviet Union, USSR never said, we are ready if you continue sabotaging us to sever relations with you. They never said that before. Okay? So instead of helping Russia to balance the world, the creeps in the EU, the creeps in the US, They continue sabotaging Russia every step of the way. They try to weaken Russia. The weaker the great balancer, I have news for you, the stronger China will be. Because this is the time when the great rebalancing is balancing things to China, towards India in the future. India is not there yet, okay? So you try to weaken Russia, Russia is too weak, that's bad for you guys, okay? A weak Russia was previously bad for the rest of the world, like for China, for India. Russia could not protect poor countries. It's rebalancing towards the east, towards the south, right? So the West becomes the vulnerable party. Go tell your politicians. You try to weaken Russia, you try to make Russia look worse, you are in the long run damaging your own chances of having the world that is balanced. And this is the answer to Seeker's question. Okay, so the next moment here. So China will continue expanding because it's a huge population. Population wants to live well. Those who are at the helm of the country, they want their population to live well. They also want more power in the world. They feel like for such a large and important country, they are being underappreciated. They are not given as much leeway and as much ability to expand as they want. And understandably, other countries will be fearful of such expansion of China, of which we will be talking a little later. But before we do that, to conclude this segment, Seeker was asking on behalf of Europe, pretty much. And here's Seeker and everybody. Here's what just happened. China and the EU signed a major, mega trade deal. This was years in the making. Xi went to Europe multiple times, especially he went very successfully in 2019, just before COVID, by the way. And he signed, they agreed pretty much, they met with everybody in the EU, with different presidents and heads of state and with heads of the EU. And they signed mega deals, and now these deals are going into effect. It actually took a little bit of time to get them going. They're going into effect, and these deals are so major that EU now becomes the number one trading partner of China. So EU officially surpassing the US as the number one trading partner of China. See, there goes Chimerica, right? Look at my webinar 11, what that is. US is furious. They're trying to get the EU to cancel deals with China. So this Biden speech, maybe you followed it during the Munich Security Conference. He says, US is back. Now, Europe, fall in line again. We will protect you from bad Russia and China. Now, Russia is our enemy number one, and China is right up there, also number one or number two. So while they're trying to get sanctions, new sanctions going against Russia, they want to sabotage Russian economy again, which is what prompted Lavrov to warn the EU that Russia will sever relations with the EU if they continue sabotaging Russia like this. So for Europe, it's very difficult already to agree to more sanctions against Russia, but EU is already falling in line, and they are saying how bad Russia is, how terrible Russia is. It is harder for Europe to agree to sever relations with China because this new deal implies that Chinese invest like some astronomical billions upon billions and multi-billions into trillions, into maybe not trillions, but hundreds of billions in European economy. And European economy is bombing right now. European economy is in dire straits, guys. Europe needs desperately infusions from China, so investments from China. Now Europeans will allow Chinese to buy ports, certain organizations, certain companies in Europe, and guess why they're doing that? Because those companies cannot stay afloat on their own. So they need infusion of capital. And if you think, oh my God, Chinese are taking over, Europe cannot support some of its economy anymore. When that happens, what are the choices? There are two choices. One, shrivel up and die, or sell it to the highest bidder. Who is the highest bidder? That's China. And so this New Deal is out of desperation. That means that Europe is in much more dire straits than they portray it to the rest of the world. In order to continue being able to support this population through lavish safety nets, through lavish welfare, etc., very high salaries, very high pensions, incomes, whatever. In order to continue doing that, guys, Europe has to start selling itself to China, basically. So it's understandable where seekers' fear and worry comes from, because that has a place. But where does it come from? From Europe overspending, from Europe for a while stealing from other countries, right? Colonizing other countries, having, being on top at the expense of others. And now they have to pay the price. So Chinese, in fact, may save Europe through their investments, through buying some of the companies. That may save jobs, money, can bring more money in, right? Some may lose jobs, but some may retain jobs, and more jobs could even be acquired as a result. Think about all this. It's never exactly how fearmongers tell you. If you look at it rationally, and of course, you have to look at it with respect towards others, not just yourself. If you just respect your position, but you disregard other people's position or other countries' point of view and position, then, the result will be the result, but not the result you want. Then you do not operate rationally. Then you operate with like a half a truth or a quarter of a truth instead of a full truth. And this is the full truth. So Europe is desperate, basically. EU is desperate. They need money. They need somebody who will come in and save them, and that's China. So Chinese need to get rid of US dollars, and they need to restructure their trade balance away from the US into other parts of the world. Chinese are not doing it just with Europe. It's just that Europe, because it's an expensive market. It's a market where everything costs a lot, because European salaries are bloated compared to the global south, right? I mean, we like it, US, Canada, all of the Anglo-American world, and Europe. We like being in the driver's seat, don't we? I'm just telling you the truth, guys. I'm not saying that this will change dramatically somehow in the next 5 years. I think Europe has great potential. It's a beautiful culture, beautiful achievements. I love many European countries. I love European people. You know me, guys. I love you guys. So many of you, so many of my patrons and buyers, webinar participants and clients are European. And probably 50% of you are European, guys, okay? So I love you guys. I'm European myself, okay? I studied Europe all my life and European languages and all that. Anyway, point is that we have to be honest with ourselves. We are honest with ourselves, then we arrive at the correct conclusion, and then we can create the right action. Then we know what to fear, what not to fear. Then we know where to go, where not to go. And this is the story with European relations with China. Now, but it's not just Europe, guys. So China has been in Africa and Latin America. And they go where they can do cheap natural resources. They go to those countries, those continents, and say, hey, we can offer you this. We can build a road for you. We can build infrastructure for you. And you just give us free access to your natural resources. And poor countries do that. Also, maybe there is corruption there, but Chinese honestly exchange some of their services for what they want in that specific country. Well, the problem, and I'm specifically highlighting Africa and Latin America here, specifically South America, not so much Latin America. So they go into those countries, and as long as they're not touched, and they bring their own workers, because they don't trust locals. They don't want locals working. They tried to negotiate something like this with Russia, and Russia said, oh, no, that's not going to work. If you want to build anything in our territories, such as build distribution facilities or railroads, that is our workers that will be building it. We can buy stuff from you and then build ourselves. Or we can share in the technology, invest together, and our workers do the job, and supervise under our control. But in poorer countries, like in Africa and South America, it didn't work that way, because Chinese could pull the strings, and they would say, well, our way or highway, and those countries would agree. But the problem starts when a country might have some kind of invasion and they want Chinese help. And then Chinese say, oh, no, we're not going to deal with that. You deal with that. Great example, Venezuela. So China goes into Venezuela. Venezuelans give them the rights to explore and then to mine something, or especially it's oil, so it's extract oil. They give them license, everything. Chinese take over, bring in their own people. Then US tries to attack Venezuela, and Chinese and threatens China. They say, oh, we are going to be after China. We'll take away all those rights that the Venezuelan government gave you. And Chinese flee. Same happened in Africa more than once. They actually do not stay. We don't want a conflict. We don't want to deal with anything. Who stays? Who helps those countries? That's Russia. Then those countries turn around and say, why should we waste our precious resources on China that wouldn't help us, and give the rights to Russia? Well, that's what happened in Venezuela already. So Russians took over whatever Chinese were doing previously. In Africa, in some countries, the same complaints are coming in. Although, again, I want to stress that Chinese, sure, they want to take over resources. They say, if this is our gold mine or our diamond mine somewhere in Tanzania, for example, or if this is our rare ores mine, we work here. It belongs to us. We extract. We take it with us. Everything we find there. It is our workers. It is our profit. In exchange, we pay you something. We pay you a portion, like sort of like a tax, right? Or a tithing on whatever percentages they agree on. And we can build roads here, because roads they need to extract, to carry that stuff away, right? We can build you a port. And why they would build a port? Because they want that port. Because that's where they will take their ores or whatever they extracted and ship out to China or wherever they're shipping it. These are the terms that they give to those countries. Up until recently, everybody agreed. And I'm talking Africa and South America. It does not concern Mexico, by the way. Mexico doesn't do that for many, many reasons. And so the countries agreed. Now there's more and more of the doubt that this actually is a good idea. And more negotiations are happening when other countries become more powerful and they can already negotiate. Okay, so that's the story with Africa and Latin America. Now, in Asia, we have a really interesting situation developing. So first of all, we have ASEAN. That's an organization that unites 10 countries in Southeast Asia. And we have some people from Southeast Asia. And the question was posed to me, a very interesting question by George. And his country is part of ASEAN, right? And so the question is, he wants me to calibrate China's relationship with ASEAN, with Japan, with US, EU, as well as India, Australia. Well, I'm adding to, and Russia. And I'm adding to that New Zealand. So I will calibrate all this for you guys. I mean, lots of calibration. So relationship, that means now, in this period, and in the future period. And I will tell you all the details. It's going to be in this segment. So what happens here is that currently there's a lot of tension between China, the mammoth, the elephant in the room, and all other countries of the Southeast Asia. China is so humongous, it needs so much space to expand and to operate that it starts like encroaching on the space, on the comfort space of other countries that are a lot smaller, a lot weaker, of course. ASEAN is one of those things that allows these countries to kind of hold their own. As I said, I made some notes, and I will just simply read you the full list of all these countries that comprise ASEAN. It's Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, Myanmar, which is Burma, Cambodia, Brunei, and Laos. These 10 countries. The ASEAN was organized in mid-20th century, if I'm not mistaken, in 1960s. I don't think I have this noted here, but let's just say 1960s. And the headquarters are in Indonesia. That's where it was organized. And several countries joined, and now more countries joined. So what we have here is 10 countries bonded, and their slogans are very good. They are cooperation and the working together and all that. You can find it online. It's a nice slogan, nice logo, nice idea. I like the idea. So countries are sort of like different countries, but they respect each other and they work together. And so most of these are smaller countries, except Indonesia, which is a very large country, and some medium-sized countries here, like Malaysia and Thailand and Philippines. So these countries, they basically cooperate and they try to work together. And China is encroaching on a lot of them. When they're together, it's easier for them, of course, to counter China's expansion. But at the same time, they are very close neighbors and they have to work with China. Now, another thing here is that many of these countries are located around the South China Sea. And two of you at least asked this question about South China Sea and China's assertiveness or China's expansion in South China Sea, what it means and all that. So I'm going to be talking about that as well. But for a moment, I wanted to digress and talk about ASEAN. It is discussed and calibrated in my book, Geopolitical Quantum Calibrations, right behind me, that book is. And I calibrated, just for this webinar, I decided to go ahead and calibrate ASEAN again for you. And just to demonstrate how an organization that is effective, that is respectful of each other, and that is, built on principles that are decent principles, how it calibrates. And so ASEAN calibrates at quantum calibration 280, Chi, which means how it manifests, right? How people see it, also 280. Same number. I calibrated ahead of time because I was very curious. And guess what? The effectiveness also is 280. So ASEAN right now, George and everybody else who asks about this, is one of the most effective international organizations in the world. Congratulations. I mean, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have problems. It has problems, and there are probably, one of the things about ASEAN, like any organization, like this international organization, there is a demand for members to resolve all the disputes, territorial and other disputes between themselves. So all these countries, in order to participate, must have dispute-free situation between them. It doesn't mean that disputes do not arise. Like, for example, I know that there was a territorial dispute maybe a year or two ago between Singapore and Malaysia, right? I'm sure George can confirm that. There was a dispute. But then this organization may also help these countries to resolve the dispute. Then there is also Russia. I know Russia was involved on some level in the resolution of that dispute between Singapore and Malaysia, which are located on the same peninsula, Singapore at the very southern tip of that Malay peninsula. And Singapore at one point was actually sort of a part of Malaysia, but Malaysia was really a colony at the time. It was not a independent country. And then Singapore and Malaysia separated when they formed independent countries. Very interesting history. I actually love that part of the world. I love Malaysia. I'm a fan of Malaysia. I've been there, and I have warm memories from that. Again, read about that in my book, Geopolitical Quantum Calibrations. I have not been to Singapore, by the way, but I was friends with people from Singapore in the past. Also, I met a lot of people, heard a lot of good things, and of course, I know quite a bit about Singapore, despite having not reached it physically, but one day I will. Anyway, so this is an example of a good organization. Yet ASEAN is constantly at loggerheads with China, even though it tries to work with China, but also it tries to use other countries, other powerful countries such as US and Russia to counter Chinese aggression, or Chinese assertiveness, you can call it. So what we have here is this like very convoluted and complicated knot of various things that are happening around China. And this is why I promise you guys this, while this webinar is about China, it is about all of us, about the rest of the world. And in China, there is a lot of reflection. We reflect in China. Our relations with China reflect back to us what we really are. Right, Seeker? What I was telling you previously. And same with ASEAN, guys. Okay? So, that's the story with ASEAN and Southeast Asia. I will continue talking about relationships with different countries and where it's all going. And then in the end, I will do those juicy plum calibrations for you so that you really understand what's what. So looking at my notes here, okay, here they are. Okay, what's the next? So South China Sea. Again, a couple of you asked me this question. I know it's a very volatile and very important question for many people, not just living in Southeast Asia, but over there it causes a ton of tension, a ton of distrust of China. So China is expanding. So they started making those artificial islands in South China Sea and claiming that the entire breadth of South China Sea, and look at the map, guys. If you look at the map, you will see how many countries that I named as part of ASEAN are bordering South China Sea. So they started claiming the entire South China Sea is theirs. They claim almost the entire South China Sea as their territorial waters. And to prove that, they built some artificial islands in the middle of South China Sea, which annoys the hell out of everybody. And they give each of those countries, there is Vietnam, there is Indonesia, etc. They give each of those countries a tiny, teeny sliver of territorial waters near their shores. And they say the rest belongs to us. Why are they doing that? This is crazy, right? It's like, that doesn't make any sense. By the way, this it does calibrate pretty low, what they're doing there. It is very underhanded, very disgusting, I would say, kind of tactics that they're using. But why are they doing that? And they're doing that because of the US aggression. Because US always claimed that South China Sea is their territory. Taiwan, by the way, look at the map, you will see that Taiwan is in the northeastern corner of South China Sea. So US has been flexing muscles there, trying to spur other countries to get into some kind of tiff with China. They've been trying to pretty much accelerate animosities and distrust in that area. Taiwan is their number one goal. to always keep Taiwan separate. And some of you asked me this question too about Taiwan. What is the future of Taiwan? I will answer it right away. For as long as U.S. is strong, this strong, or near this strong, there will be no resolution. China is trying to kind of invite Taiwan very peacefully, amicably. Oh, let's just like sit down, let's talk together. Well, part of it, they're trying to do that because more aggressive tactics didn't work for them. They tried to return Taiwan in an aggressive kind of like a military way. Never worked because the U.S. is defending, protecting Taiwan. The result of that was USA's expansion and this overwhelming presence in South China Sea and everywhere around. Chinese could not tolerate that. They were encroaching on Chinese trade, on Chinese vessels, etc. So Chinese decided, oh, here is our solution. We're just going to claim entire South China Sea as our territory, as our territorial waters. And as such, territorial waters actually means that a foreign military vessel cannot enter your waters. I mean, frankly, I wish Russia claimed the entire Black Sea as territorial waters, and a lot of people actually in the West feel that way too, because the U.S., especially the U.S., is extremely audacious there. For the time being, it is what it is. So while Russia is being very mild-mannered in the Black Sea, and it shouldn't be this this mild-mannered. A lot of people from the West agree with me. See, China actually took steps and took possession of South China Sea. I know it looks disgusting to all the countries that surround it. It's terrible. I know that. I realize that. I'm just telling you what caused China to do that, and that's the U.S. U.S. aggression, U.S. flexing muscles, U.S. threatening. And then Chinese said, no, you cannot do this to us anymore. You're threatening us, you're humiliating us, and we're not going to go there anymore. We were humiliated enough by you all in 19th and 20th century. Now we're going to do it our way. And they started making those artificial islands. And this is the story of South China Sea. It's still unsavory. I would agree with that. But they exhausted all other venues. Well, Russia has more venues to work with, more flexibility. U.S. Actually was successfully subverting Vietnam and the India and everything. And Chinese said, we are expanding. If we expand, then U.S. has less leverage here. And if it's our territorial waters, U.S. cannot enter our territorial waters, otherwise we shoot. So that does not protect them 100% from the U.S. overly aggression in that region, but it gives them more protection. And nobody recognizes that whole South China Sea as Chinese territory. No. Internationally, it's not recognized. But Chinese said, this is our rules. We recognize it. And so the U.S. now has to think twice, 3 times, 4 times before they start provoking Chinese in what Chinese say are their territorial waters. And this is the reason why it was done. Irks a lot of different countries surrounding South China Sea, but that's the way it is. Okay, so that's South China Sea. Now, I'm going to go into U.S. relations with the U.S. And, of course, they are pretty bad. Trump made it worse. I talked about it before, so I'm not going to go there again. Biden says, on one hand, we want to restore relations with China, but on the other hand, China is sort of an enemy, at least half enemy. So I don't think Biden can go back and retract on what Trump already did. He can soften the blow. But Chinese already got the message and moved on, guys. So whatever they're doing with the U.S., see, they're doing what is beneficial to them, what is not beneficial, or where they have been maligned by the U.S., or when something was done to them and they didn't like it, they started already withdrawing. It's already a process of withdrawal that is happening from the U.S. This is why I said that it's possible goods will become more expensive in the U.S. and maybe even more scarce. I don't anticipate terrible shortages, but the US has already damaged relationship with China quite a bit. There is no talk about Chimerica anymore. That ship has sailed. Okay, but US, with doing what they're doing, they're pushing China and Russia closer and closer together. And that's the story with the US. So everything throughout this webinar, I mentioned the US and other countries and their relationship with China, etc., all the time. So look throughout the webinar. This is only part of my answer to the US situation. Okay. Now, Australia and New Zealand. We have an excellent question, by the way, so I'm going to pull up the question again. Here we go, about New Zealand. So I'm going to address them sort of like together, but also there is a difference between the two. So Kate asks, New Zealand government has an ongoing relationship with China, pursuant to China-New Zealand trade agreements. The Chinese wealthy buying property and business in New Zealand. Our PM Jacinda Ardern is socialist leaning and she has a positive attitude towards China. Where is this leading? Is it a good thing or is it heading towards a takeover by China? Oh, there is that takeover again, right? Yeah, well, it can, Kate, seriously, it can head to a takeover only if New Zealand allows that to happen, right? New Zealand has government, has army, has the population, has parliament, and has all the attributes of power and decision-making in its hands. So China cannot just come in and say, we take you over. And what, the population will shrivel up and die? Well, obviously not. And New Zealanders are freedom-loving people. I'm sure you would agree with that. They also are people who are used to democracy, right? They're also the kind of people who are self-sufficient people, right? I'm sure you will agree with that as well. Therefore, all China can do is come in and say, hey, we're offering you more trade. We're offering to buy some of your companies. We're offering to buy something, to build something in your country. We're offering you various deals. Maybe invest in your country, etc., etc. And New Zealand can say yes or no. Looks like Jacinda Ardern wants to say yes to at least some of that stuff, right? It doesn't mean that New Zealand will not negotiate. Of course, New Zealand will negotiate what is good and what terms, etc., etc. And New Zealand, compared to the countries I mentioned before, such as in Africa or in South America, is a strong country. Compared to them, it's a small country, but a stronger country. Yes, there is definitely a risk that clandestinely, quietly, Chinese will try to take over your economy. Then watch it, guys. You watch it, okay? You don't allow them to go too far. Yes, it's possible that Chinese spies are everywhere. And they are, guys. Chinese are spying. Believe me, Chinese spies are everywhere. But the country has to guard itself against it. Well, the country just doesn't sit, it's not a sitting duck. Any country is not a sitting duck. Country has to develop its own security measures, its own procedures, protocols, etc., etc. Right? Go ahead and do it. And then Russians had to deal with that. The Chinese were stealing technology from Russia, especially military technology and space technology. Chinese were doing all kinds of things. The Chinese tried to take over parts of Siberia. Russians said, okay, this you can do, this you cannot do. And they developed various mechanisms. And this is what New Zealand has to do, same exact thing. I'm sure there are certain mechanisms already in New Zealand, but the fact that Jacinda wants to open up more to China and invite China in, she's correct. She's taking the cue from Europe. It is possible that infusions of capital are needed in New Zealand right now because, as I said, the West and New Zealand is part of the West, even though it's located in Southern Hemisphere, which is actually its huge benefit and bonus. Same with Australia in period 9, okay? But because it's still part of the West, it is suffering parts of the problems of the West. and it will continue suffering problems in the West. Same with Australia. However, guys, you do have an advantage of being close enough to China, and the fact that you are part of the Southern Hemisphere, which is a ruling hemisphere in period 9. Okay, so that's New Zealand. And Australia. Australia has a humongous tiff going on right now with China. Huge tiff. There are some investigations that I looked up that talk about the fact how Chinese are taking over, spying on Australia, etc., etc. This is not a new story. I heard this before. I even watched an Australian series talking about this clandestine influence that China exerts over Australia. And same probably goes for New Zealand, guys. Although New Zealand is smaller, it's an island and it's more removed. So New Zealand, Australia is a bigger market. So Chinese probably went after Australia first. And now they're going after New Zealand in addition. So in Australia, a humongous backlash against China is going on. They're saying that the investigation showed like a lot of wrongdoing, a lot of clandestine stuff going on, etc., etc. So I might be able to link that investigation below this webinar, so look for the links, or I will link it on Patreon for my patrons. We'll see how we go. Point is, yes, Chinese are doing this. However, it's every country's prerogative and goal and role, and it's actually a mission of every government to protect themselves. They say, well, this is where the buck stops. This is it. You cannot go any further. Here you can do it. Over there you cannot. That's it. That's off limits. Every country has to do that. Not yell and scream, we're afraid, we're afraid. You know, if the country is responsible, if the government is responsible, then they will do their job. Whether Australian government is doing that or they're so corrupt that they're in the pocket of Chinese. That was the series that I watched. It was about that corruption of the government that was in the pocket of Chinese, basically. You might want to watch this series. Unfortunately, forget its name. It ran for 2 or 3 seasons. It was Australian series. And that series actually talks about corruption in the Australian government. If the government of Australia is corrupt, if it's in the pocket of the Chinese, then bad on Australian people. Same with New Zealand. Depends on how honest your government is. Watch it, right? Watch the government, watch your president, watch or she's prime minister, I believe. Anyway, so in Australia, if a lot of Chinese do buy properties there. Do you know why Chinese buy properties in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, in Singapore, in a lot of countries, as a matter of fact? Do you know why? Because there is tons of corruption in China as well. And as it's estimated that up to 10% of Chinese GDP escapes and is money laundered out of the country every year. So some rich Chinese, and there are a lot of rich Chinese guys, what they do, they take some of the money out and buy properties all over the world, because properties cannot fail you. So that's why there are so many properties. These are not necessarily pro-government Chinese. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Some of them are very rich people. Well, the investigation from Australia shows that there are spies embedded, they say, in all kinds of companies, organizations, governments all over the world. And Chinese who immigrated a long time ago from China, they have become pro-China now, even those who are very rich people. That's what the investigation by Australia says. Of course, this is a very fear-mongering kind of investigation, but it does have its merits. So I'm going to try to link that stuff for you guys, and you just make your own conclusions. I'm not going to go deep into that. So Australia is now sort of like fighting back against China. And here I'm going to give you the clincher of the New Zealand and Australia stories. Do you know who is pressuring them from outside to be fearful of China and fight against China? That's the US. The US is doing that, okay? So they see China expand somewhere. Same with Russia. That's Russia and China. Well, there is also Iran, of course. But Iran is so locked in, it hardly has any place to expand anywhere. But China and Russia, they see China or Russia reaching out anywhere in the best possible ways. They say to that country, hey, you, better fall in line and start maligning China. I guarantee to you that Australia is very much under the US thumb, very much. How much New Zealand is under US thumb? You know, I calibrated all these countries and I wrote a very big article, very interesting article as part of my book, Geopolitical Quantum Calibrations, about New Zealand. Of course, New Zealand also has a lot of problems, but guys, there is so much US influence. So what US is doing, US is fighting for influence now in Australia and New Zealand with China. That's what's happening. These investigations, fear-mongering, if you see articles that are fearful of China in your media or reports, maybe on TV and stuff, this is US exerting its influence and trying to get China to leave your country, or tries to change your government's point of view in such a way that government does not allow Chinese to buy properties or companies or whatever in China. So this is the story. Yes, you have to watch it, obviously. You know, listen, there is healthy fear as well. Healthy fear. But you also have to be rational and reasonable. Like I was telling to Europeans previously, same goes for Australians and New Zealanders. Basically take the cue from Russia. They said, Chinese want to lease agricultural land in our Siberia. Well, this is how you do it. Like this, like this, like this. Then people complain that Chinese are doing this and this and they don't like it in those agricultural lands that they leased. People complain to the government, Russian people I mean. And the government then tweaks its regulations to take into account the complaints by Russians about certain practices of the Chinese. For example, Chinese leased some land in Siberia as agricultural land. They started producing crops there. And then Russians noticed that they started using pesticides. So Russians complained to the government, you know, those leased lands, Chinese are pesticiding them. And that is against the agreement. Russian government steps in and said, no, you're not allowed to pesticide here. We will be watching you like hawks. Now they're watching them. Okay? That's how the government is supposed to work, people. In case you didn't know. Your governments are supposed to fulfill that supervisory monitoring role. And your citizens too. If something is getting out of control, go and complain to your government. Okay? So that applies to the rest of the West. Okay. All right. And India. We have India. And I saved Russia for last as this nice, juicy dessert. So India. Bad relationship. Again, at least a couple of you asked the question about India and China's relationship with India. There was also something about Vietnam. I'll try to mention Vietnam and Japan here. Okay, India. Pretty bad. One of you asked me a question whether India will return to the BRICS and how come India is falling under the US thumb? First of all, India is not falling under the US thumb. I said that before on several occasions. I think the similar questions were asked before. Oh yes, it's actually in the book. Oh, come on, guys. Whoever did not read the book, Geopolitical Quantum Calibrations, you need to buy it and read it. Because I explained that exhaustively in there about India. India is trying to play multiple fields. It actually considers Russia its big friend. Since mid-20th century, when Russia helped India to get rid of colonialism, get rid of the UK as colonial power. But India is playing multiple fields, okay? So yes, Russia is a friend, but it is the US that gives us a lot of jobs. You know, a lot of call centers and it is tech support, etc. is now all Indian. all customer service is all Indian, and they've been very bad at first. Now they're very good. They've been trained. They're quite good. They're very polite. I think they do a pretty decent job. I mean, whenever I call, I had Macy's orders and they were all screwed up, and I called the customer service. It's all Indian. It used to be really bad, and now they're pretty good, I have to say, you know. So basically you are very possible you will encounter a customer service that is Indian living in the US if you call a bank, if you call Macy's, or I don't know about Amazon. I think Amazon too transitioned to Indian. They give astronomical amounts of money for that. Are you kidding? For Indians, you know, life there is a lot cheaper than in the US. They make decent money, and they sit in India. They don't even have to be in the US. So India is making out like bandit, having decent relations with the US. You cannot blame them for that. You cannot make them abandon this kind of relationship. However, I don't know where these notions come from. India never abandoned the BRICS. I calibrated, again, in my book, Geopolitical Quantum Calibrations, I calibrated the BRICS, and I said clearly there, the BRICS does not calibrate very well. It's like okay, marginally. I don't remember the exact calibration, but look there. That's because members of the BRICS, they're very different countries. They united based on this idea, perpetuated, by the way, and propagandized by Goldman Sachs, that these are the largest, best 5 economies of the future. Actually, there were 3 economies first. RIC, in other words, right? Russia, India, and China. Then they added Brazil to that, and then the rest of the countries, or BRIC it was first, right? BRIC with Brazil. And then they added South Africa because they wanted an S, and they also wanted some country in Africa or some other region of the world. Turkey didn't make the cut. They decided South Africa was better. So these countries are so different, and they all have their own interests that they will be pushing and pushing and pushing. Okay, and China and India have been enemies since forever, guys, forever. And they have these territorial disputes that, BRICS is one of those rare international organizations that does not require its members to solve territorial disputes, primarily because Russia and China resolved their territorial disputes, and Brazil is located on the other side of the globe. But India and China never resolved their territorial disputes, and Russia helped. Russia tried, and Russia is helping whenever Russia can. Well, right now, Russia is busy with other things. And so when Russia was busy with other things, a war started between China and India. Of course, it ended, that territorial war. It was like there were dead there, and it was a pretty big skirmish on the border. Didn't end in anything because it cannot, but China rubs a lot of countries the wrong way, and it will continue rubbing a lot of countries the wrong way because China is the biggest gross country currently on the planet. So this will continue, guys. I mean, just learn to live with it, like me, with a sense of humor. Okay. What are you gonna do, right? When you can't do anything, remember that expression, like, you know, God, give me the wisdom. Whatever I cannot change, give me the wisdom to see that and to make peace with that, right? If you can't do anything about it, remember it was in my previous webinar. You know, what is there to worry about if you can't do anything about it, right? That's Buddhist wisdom, Zen wisdom. All right, so that's India. And it will be like this. Russia will not allow China-India conflict to become too big. Indian government is wise enough. Chinese government is wise enough not to allow it to escalate too much. US will continue pushing India towards a war with China. Russia will not allow it. So there are a lot of counterweights here. And so a big war will not happen, but small wars could happen between India and China going forward. Now, as far as Vietnam goes, that was another question. I'm incorporating a question by one of you, whether Vietnam is now in the thrall of the US and Israel. Same with India. The question went there, is India is in the thrall of the US and Israel? Same with Vietnam. And guys, I'm listing all the questions under this webinar. So, and it will also be listed on Patreon. So you will be able to read those questions in their entirety. But since I'm answering all these questions throughout the webinar, I'm not reading them per se. I'm just going to answer that. Yeah, so as far as Vietnam goes, Vietnam considers Russia its big friend, wants to be close to Russia. At the very same time, Vietnam has become quite westernized, and some consider it even Americanized too much. I've seen Americans who left the US and don't want to stay here anymore, move to Vietnam and then move out disappointed, saying, it's way too Americanized now. I'm disappointed. I wanted something that was anti-US, basically, but that didn't work. Anyway, they want to build infrastructure. They want to live well. They look at the West and they say, that's where they live well. And so they start emulating the West. I mean, you cannot blame them for wanting to live well, guys. Because in the past, the ideal, that big beacon of how to live well was in the West. Now it's moving from the West. But all these countries, whether it's China or Vietnam or Japan even for that matter, in the past, because there was a time when Japan was quite poor, they were emulating, they were taking the best practices from the West and bringing them to themselves and saying, look, this is how we do it. We build roads, we build infrastructure, we make everybody more prosperous, we build businesses, etc., etc. So they were doing all this. You know, it's understandable why they were doing all this, right? So their people would live well. Some do it better than others. So the problem with Vietnam is that they took some of the practices that are not very nice and are questionable. And there's a lot of greed amongst the population. I met Vietnamese, and they were very, very poor guys. They hardly have like a bowl of rice to eat per day. Same with China in the 20th century. I remember we had Vietnamese students in the Soviet Union when I was young, and I'm standing in line in the post office to send my parcels out. And there were two Vietnamese students standing in line before me. So they approached the counter to give their parcels. They're sending parcels back to Vietnam. Two Vietnamese students. And it's like a small package. You can see what it is because they were packaging that stuff in the post office. So you bring them open stuff if it's international package, and they package it for you, and you can see what that is. And they were sending to Vietnam towels, and they were the kind of towels, waffle towels. Here in the US, those waffle towels, they're kitchen towels. They're quite expensive. Like I was buying, each piece was like $5 for a good quality waffle towel. In the US, $5. Yeah, I remember those were like pennies, meaning that kopecks. You know, each piece was not even a ruble. It was like a few kopecks for each piece. So they were sending 2 or 3 towels back to Vietnam. That was their international parcel. Can you believe it? That's how, you know, those towels were considered so throwaway in the Soviet Union. They were like nothing, you know, nobody was thinking twice. I mean, we use them like use, throw out. They're all cotton, actually, very nice. You know, I wish I brought those to the US because here you can't even find all cotton towels. And if you do, they're not as absorbent. And, you know, I was just paying, I have these towels and I put $5 a piece, you know, unbelievable. Anyway, so that's how poor they were in those days, okay? Very skinny students. We had a lot of international students where I grew up in Odessa and in Moscow. Anyway, so that's Vietnam. Vietnam tries to be, sometimes they make mistakes. The country is still communist, it's still ruled by the Communist Party, but they're trying to take the cue from China, and they're not doing it as successfully as China, although their economy is growing. They also really want to have good relations with Russia, and they want Russia to be there more, but Russians are busy in other parts of the globe. So, of course, Russia, with 150 million population, it is not a match to bigger countries in terms of investments and in terms of going to different countries and spreading there. Russia has to pick and choose, pick their battles. This is where they want to go. So they don't have enough, Russia doesn't have enough manpower even to send to China. I mean, to send to Vietnam, I meant to say, or to other Southeast Asian countries. They have to focus pointedly on countries where they can get the best benefit and the best relationship and the most lucrative and important countries. Where they do business with Vietnam, of course, but much less than other countries. So, of course, somebody else will dominate the scene in Vietnam, and that's the US, and again, together with China. But the US managed to make Vietnam doubt China a lot, and their former allies during Soviet days, right? Although there were always territorial and border disputes between Vietnam and China, Vietnam was always slightly afraid of China. However, during Vietnam War, guys, Chinese sent a lot of troops there to help fight against Americans. So, some of the troops Americans thought were Vietnamese were actually Chinese. They look quite alike, especially to a Western eye, right? Okay, so Vietnam now is like between places. They're also trying to balance, just like India. So it's a very similar situation, but they're more communist leaning. And of course, Vietnam is very distrustful of China because of this dispute in the South China Sea. And that touches Vietnam more than other countries maybe, because they're right there. And because so much of the shore should be Vietnamese, but Chinese are saying, no, it's our shore. So that's the situation with Vietnam. Only Russia can resolve this. Only Russia can moderate these kinds of situations. But can Russia spare the time? That's a very big question. And also, ASEAN should get involved in all these things. China will be stopped one way or another when they go too far, okay? Because there are enough, I'm giving you prediction. One way or another, China will need to understand where the boundaries are. But China has not reached those boundaries yet. There is still room for Chinese expansion before other countries say, no, you're not going there. And because the West is so evil to Russia, Russia will not help the West manage this situation. Why would they? Because the West is so horrible to Russia. Why would Russia help the West? You know what I mean? So even if US is right in some way in South China Sea, saying that China, you cannot expand like this, and we want to help those countries, even if the US is right 10% or 15%, Russia will not recognize it and say, it's your thing. Resolve it yourselves. Well, with Japan, of course, I'm just going to stop very, very briefly, guys, because I already talked about Japan quite a bit previously. You cannot expect China to have any good feelings about Japan after what happened in the 20th century. That's all there is to it, okay? However, each country on the globe, especially countries that are powerful countries, and Japan is one of them, of course, China is a powerful country, they have to somehow agree on some kind of terms so they don't plunge themselves and the world into a war. Unless they want a war, but Japan does not want a war, I assure you. China does not want a war. Japan is actually weakening lately, especially after Fukushima. It's weakening quite dramatically, and it has certain things that it can do, but not that much. So the mutual animosity is pretty serious between China and Japan. And this will continue. I will calibrate for you and you will see what I mean. Okay, so I will also tell you about Chinese relations with Russia. Okay, I already talked about it quite a bit. What happens between China and Russia? China and Russia do not have any territorial disputes. There were some small ones, and they resolved it. There were small disputes, actually. I mean, they are compared to other countries, they were inconsequential. Russia gave China one island in the middle of a river, and that resolved the disputes. Okay, well, Russians are still unhappy that that island was given to China. It's in the middle of the river, actually. It's not in the sea. But that actually deleted anything that might have existed between China and Russia. Therefore, the road was freed up for very good relations. Well, Chinese are very tough negotiators, and Russians are very tough negotiators. This is why negotiating deals with China take a long time for Russia, very, very long time. But once they agree, it just like keeps going, and it's very quiet. So Russia and China, the relationship will continue being strong and positive. US assured that, and the EU assured that by being so nasty to Russia. And the US also being so nasty to China, they assured that they did everything to push Russia and China back together. And here's that karma peeking through, right? US tried so hard in the 20th century to separate Russia and China. They succeeded. And what's the result? Russia and China are better together, better than ever, right? And on new principles. The new principles are actually very, very good principles. These new principles are: you do your thing, we do our thing, we become stronger separately, but whenever we can, we work together. And we certainly form this alliance that is beneficial to us, not so much in trade, but in politics, geopolitics, and parts of the military. And now we are hearing, this is very much in the works, that Russia and China may form a formal military alliance, guys. Formal military alliance. This is a huge deal. Do you know why this is a huge deal? Russia resisted any new military alliances after the Warsaw Bloc fell apart. You know? Resisted with all might. Russia doesn't want any formal alliances, especially military alliances, because there is a lot of bitter taste in the mouth. And China traditionally never formed alliances with anyone. I mean, first and foremost, military, but China generally does not form any alliances, especially military, with anyone. It's a huge deal. In other words, congratulations, US. You achieved what? The opposite of what you wanted to achieve. That's the story. Well, huge strides are being made, very good strides, and they're so quiet about it. The power of Siberia, that's the pipeline. Gas pipelines, oil pipelines, they're building a lot of infrastructure, Chinese and Russians together in Siberia, in the Far East. Russians are supervising it very closely, so they're not allowing Chinese to take over anything. Even though there are a lot of panic, it's like, oh my gosh, Chinese are taking over Siberia and the Far East. And, yeah, so all this panic, you guys stop that panic, okay? You just talk to your governments, tell them to do their job. If the government does their job, everything is fine. Okay, so another thing, of course, the trade routes, the Silk Roads. The new Silk Road, the trade route, is completely operational through Russia. Goods are going to Europe and even UK through Russia. All these agreements that China puts in place with with Europe, EU right now, what I talked about previously, all the trade will go through Russia. So Russia benefits too from these agreements that they just made with EU. Okay? So it's like total win-win. So I like it. This I like. Okay. I wanted to tell you guys about the yuan in 5 years, because one of you asked me, where is the yuan in 5 years? You know what? I'll probably leave it for the next segment, or if I can't fit it into this webinar, because, I may not be able to fit it in this webinar. Maybe I'll answer it some other time. But, remember to ask me again, because this webinar is going in a different direction, as you see, than talking about the yuan. And it's like a separate conversation. To be honest, it's convoluted story with yuan, okay? Let me just tell you, let me just pause actually and tell you several things about yuan. I will answer your question now so that we cover it. Okay, so yuan. The thing is that China had to keep yuan devalued and continues keeping the yuan devalued, significantly devalued, to be competitive against other markets and against other countries, because Chinese economy is very much export-based economy. So Seeker was asking me previously what's going on. They're undermining other economies, other producers, other manufacturers around the world, because they can and they have to. In order for their population to become well-to-do, which is their primary goal in this 100-year plan, they have to keep yuan low. Same with ruble, by the way, to stay competitive. And no matter what other countries try to do, they manage to keep it low. Okay, I have some yuan investment. I keep it as an alternative to the dollar. In 4 or 5 years, I think yuan will be a little bit higher than today against the US dollar. Okay, so what does that mean? Is it a good investment? Only if you are absolutely sure you want an alternative to the US dollar and you cannot find something else. Because it's a nightmare to deal with a Chinese bank. I'm with the Bank of China in New York, and it's a nightmare. Okay, I did warn you guys before. So it will be a little bit higher, in my opinion, in this timeline. That's what I'm saying. If the timeline changes and the US is so aggressive against China and tries to dampen its goods and its trade so aggressively that Chinese have no choice but to again dampen their currency in order to stay competitive, then this is not going to happen. So I do not intend to keep my yuan investment forever. Just to give you an additional tip, since we're on this topic, I will be transferring it out in several years' time. I will find a better place to sell it, and I will transfer out of yuan. Listen, maybe in 20 years or in 10 even years, yuan will be higher, and you will make profit in US dollars. But that's only against US dollar, because US dollar will be eventually depreciating. And of course, as US dollar depreciates, there's only so much. Well, US dollar is here, yuan is here. Here's our yuan. There's only so much depreciation that yuan can do. If dollar keeps depreciating, then eventually they go like this, right? And as people live better and better in China, they also want their strong currency, because the stronger the currency, the more they can travel abroad, the more they can afford abroad. The better people live in any country, the more people travel. Right now, this is not an issue, it's COVID. But eventually it will end. And at that point, US dollar goes lower in period 9. You know my prediction. Yuan, even if it stays the same, it's already higher. They can only depreciate so much. They already depreciated a lot. So maybe in 10, 20 years, but then US dollar at that point will be low. So do you really want to compete with other currency that is also trying to lower itself? In my opinion, it's better to either invest in something that you know will appreciate, or buy something that you know will appreciate. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. Yeah, I do have private consultations, so these kinds of questions, because they're so personal, they really belong in the consultation. Just ask me a lot of questions and I will explain all this. That's how those types of consultations work with me. Okay, all right, so that's all for this segment, and I left for like big juicy dessert, I left all the calibrations, guys. Really juicy calibrations. I think you like them. Okay. We are calibrating China's relations with various countries and with ASEAN. Okay, and I made a huge list here. You might want to write it down, calibrate it ahead of time. So we are calibrating 2 sets of periods. Okay. Period number 1 is current calibrations, which is 2021 through 2023. I take like 3 years. Okay? So through this period, before period 9 starts, that is, I'm giving you this as current calibration, and the future calibration, which will be period of 2030 through 2035. I'm taking a 6-year period really here and calibrating for that period. That's future calibration. And now, China's relations with the following countries. With Russia, current 280. That's friendliness and neutrality. Very good, high calibration, right? Very hard to come by in relations currently between countries. Practically no other country relations calibrate this well. Very rare. Very few countries like that. And guess what? In the future period, you remember what dates I said? I'm not going to say them again. I'll just say current and future. In the future period, 2030 through 35, also 280. So relationship between Russia and China stays on the same level today and well into the future. ASEAN with China, current 85, grief. Future 90, that's also grief. 5 points higher, but still grief. Lots of food for thought. Please, guys, write it down, my table, and share it with us on Patreon. With USA, current 181. Do you know why it's at pride? Because a lot of sales, a lot of trade goes on between these two countries. Still a ton of trade. And they're dependent on each other a lot. And Biden, on some weird level, is still trying to fix relationship with China, what Trump damaged. And China, maybe, hoping beyond hope, it's possible to fix a relationship with the US. So that's your pride right there. Future with USA, 90. That's grief. So ASEAN, you know why ASEAN is so low, because countries of ASEAN, all the South China Sea stuff, they really hate and distrust China right now. So USA is heading in the same direction, 90. That's future. EU, China with EU, current, 185, guys. Not much better than USA. With all those trade deals and everything, 185. And future, you're not going to believe it. It's going to be 90. Also grief. In other words, all the efforts to create this better relations and trade with the EU will not result in anything much. Maybe there will be trade, but hatred, terrible hatred, and maybe also a lot of fear, distrust of China, what Seeker expressed in his comment. This distrust, this fear, this almost grief in that comment of Seekers. That's what I'm seeing. That, like, they're taking over, they are buying up our properties, our businesses, our ports, whatnot. It's possible that Europeans will feel like that throughout about China. So be careful. This is not good news, right? For Europe and for China also. I'm proceeding to the following. So Australia with China, current, the relationship is at 40, guys. 40. That's guilt. That's the level of guilt. That's horrible. As I said, this big investigation about China from Australia, relationship hit the bottom, went through it, and keeps going down, down, down into hell dimension. And future with Australia, 80. So improves to grief from guilt. Horrible, right? Just horrible. Now, New Zealand, guys, New Zealand. I'm adding this. That was not in the question, but Kate asked a good question about New Zealand. So current with New Zealand, 100. That's fear. New Zealand fears China. Even though Jacinda Ardern is trying to improve relations with China, but look where she's starting at, in fear. Okay, maybe it was worse, but she improved it to fear. And future, 90. So goes down to 90, which is grief. Nothing to write home about. Future relations of the majority of the world with China will be horrible. That, by the way, means, I'm giving you a prediction here based on these calibrations. This, by the way, means, guys, that China will try to expand beyond where the majority of the world allows it to expand. A lot of countries will be unhappy with China going forward, except for Russia. Because Russia, as I said, Russia already developed a set of rules. You cannot step over this. You can come to this border, this is the end, and you cannot go there. And China listens. And Russia is way too strong militarily for China, and China needs Russia so much. Because without Russia, China will be overrun by the US just like that. Because the US military is a lot stronger. Or at least it will be a lot easier, economically and militarily too. Russia, the great balancer, serves as that barrier. You know, always did. Then beyond that, they cannot move, you know. As long as China has Russia in its corner, they're good. But yeah, this actually talks about a lot of countries being very unhappy with China. Very interesting. Very interesting. So keep all this in mind, guys. It's this is a super revealing set of calibrations, won't you say? Okay, and Japan. China-Japan relationship. Well, you won't be surprised. Current is 85 grief. And in the future, it's 80. 85 now will be 80. Just 5 points below, same grief. And you also asked me to calibrate China's relations with India. I'll do the same. I did not include this in here. And a lot of calibrations here, so I actually have to wrap up the calibration thing because it's a lot of calibrations, and you know how that is. It's very tiring to do calibrations. So I'm pretty tired by now, but here is China-India relations current. Same time frame I'm doing. 85 grief, same grief. And future calibrations, that's 2030 through 35, India-China relations between the two, future relations 2030-35. Goes up to 100. So that's one single case where the relationship between China and some other country actually goes up. Yeah, because ASEAN would go up by 5 points, which is negligible. It's almost nothing. You know, slightly something changes and it doesn't. But I see that slight improvement between China and ASEAN will happen in the future sometime. And with India, while 100 fear is very low, but it's still a big leap from grief to fear. Big leap. Okay, because it's a different category. Okay, so that's all for this segment, guys, and I will see you in the following segment. We covered a lot, and I will just give you a little bit more in segment 3, and we will start wrapping up the webinar at that point. Have a good one. See you next segment.